Right now, you're at the top of the food chain. You've never had to think about that. You've never stood at the edge of a forest and wondered whether something in there could kill you before you saw it. You've never had to decide, do I chase that thing, or does that thing chase me? But here's what's strange. You are descended from creatures who made that calculation every single day. And they didn't always win. For most of human prehistory, we were not the apex predator. We were prey. Small, slow, naked, surrounded by animals that were bigger, stronger, faster, and had been on this planet far longer than us. And then something changed. Not our bodies, not our claws or our speed or our size. Something changed inside the skull, and suddenly the most dangerous animal on Earth wasn't the one with the biggest teeth. It was us. And when you understand exactly how a 150-pound hairless primate brought down a 12-ton mammoth, it changes how you think about intelligence, cooperation, fear, and what human beings are actually capable of when survival is on the line. The story most people have in their heads goes something like this. A group of muscular cavemen, fur pelts, fire, spears, they surround a giant beast, yell a lot, and stab it until it falls down. That's not what happened. The real story is stranger, quieter, and in a lot of ways more terrifying, because the actual weapon early humans used against megafauna, animals, that outweighed them by a factor of 50 wasn't a spear. It was patience, and a specific kind of cruelty that only creatures with minds like ours could imagine. Let's go back to the beginning. 300,000 years ago, Homo sapiens appeared in Africa, but anatomically modern humans sharing DNA with you existed alongside creatures that have no equivalent today. The short-faced bear, 6 feet tall at the shoulder, twice the size of a grizzly. The cave lion, bigger than any lion alive. A pack animal, the woolly mammoth, 12 tons, tusks 12 feet long, a hide thick enough to stop a thrown rock. The megatherium, the giant ground sloth, 20 feet long and weighing as much as an elephant. With claws the size of a human forearm, these animals had been on Earth for millions of years. They had survived ice ages, continental shifts, and every predator evolution could throw at them. We'd been around for a few 100,000. And here's the thing most people don't confront. Early humans weren't hunting these animals right away. For tens of thousands of years, we were eating what we could scavenge. Small animals, plants, leftovers from kills that larger predators had abandoned. We were the cleanup crew, not the hunters. The question isn't just how we learned to hunt giants. The question is, what made us think we ever could? In 2019, archaeologists were excavating a site in New Mexico called White Sands, a vast stretch of ancient lakebed that had been preserved under salt flats for thousands of years. What they found stopped them cold. Fossilized human footprints, dozens of them, and embedded within those footprints, inside the impressions left by human feet, were the tracks of a giant ground sloth. The human prints were on top of the sloth prints. Then the sloth prints were on top of the human prints again. Then human on top of sloth. They were tracking each other, circling. The sloth kept turning to face the humans, but there were no mammoth bones at the site. No kill. Just the footprints of a hunt that lasted, based on the spacing and stride pattern, several hours. Whatever happened that day, 21,000 years ago, the humans and the sloths were engaged in a sustained, deliberate interaction. And when scientists analyzed the sloth's tracks more carefully, they found something that changed the interpretation entirely. The sloth was walking on its hind legs. The giant ground sloth stood upright, not to attack. Sloths aren't built for aggression. It stood up because it was afraid. It was trying to look bigger. It was trying to scare them off. A 20-foot animal that had survived millions of years of evolution. And a group of humans had it backing up onto legs. The humans hadn't thrown a single spear yet. In 2021, anthropologist David Reichelen at the University of Southern California published an analysis of those White Sands tracks that reframed everything archaeologists thought they understood about early hunting. He argued that what those footprints showed wasn't just a single hunt. It was evidence of a system, a hunting strategy that required not courage, but cognition. To hunt something that size, you have to be able to think further ahead than the animal can. You have to know where it will be tomorrow. You have to understand its fear responses well enough to manipulate them. You have to communicate a coordinated plan to other humans without making a sound. You have to be willing to follow something for hours, days, before you ever make contact. And you have to be able to hold the idea of a future meal clearly enough in your mind to delay action right now. No other predator does this. Lions ambush. Wolves chase. Crocodiles wait. Every other apex predator on Earth operates on immediate stimulus. I see food, I pursue food. Early humans were doing something categorically different. They were running a simulation of the hunt inside their heads. Before it happened, adjusting for terrain, weather, herd behavior, the animal's specific psychology, and executing a plan. The spear wasn't the weapon. The prefrontal cortex was. There were several documented strategies, and each one is more precise than most people imagine. Persistence hunting. This is the oldest. It shows up in the Kalahari among the Sand people, who have preserved it into the modern era. It is almost certainly what those White Sands humans were doing with that sloth. The concept is brutal in its simplicity. Humans are the only mammals on Earth that can run and regulate body temperature at the same time. Every other animal, horse, deer, elephant, mammoth, pants to cool down. Panting requires stopping, or at least slowing. Humans sweat. We can run at a moderate pace for hours in the heat without overheating. An animal cannot, so the hunters wouldn't sprint. They jog, steady, relentless, never fast enough to close the gap. Just fast enough that the animal couldn't stop moving, couldn't rest, couldn't cool down. A mammoth can outrun a human for 5 minutes. It cannot outrun a human for 6 hours. By the time the animal collapsed from heat exhaustion, it wasn't fighting anymore. The kill was almost secondary. The oldest confirmed evidence of this strategy, a site in the Sahara called Wadi Kabaniya, dated to around 17,000 years ago. Dozens of large animal bones, split for marrow, no marks from other predators, with no evidence of ambush-style wounds. The kills happened in open terrain. The animals were run down. The Cliff Drive, multiple sites across North America, head smashed in Buffalo Jump in Alberta, Bonfire Shelter in Texas, show something coordinated at a scale that should be impossible for primitive people. At Bonfire Shelter, archaeologists found the bones of over 800 individual animals at the base of a cliff, carbon dated to around 10,000 years ago. 800 animals, in the same place, at the same time. To do this, you need scouts tracking herd movement weeks in advance. You need a communication system to coordinate dozens of hunters spread across kilometers of terrain. You need an understanding of animal psychology precise enough to steer a panicking herd in a specific direction. And you need a structure, a plan, that doesn't fall apart when the animals start running. These weren't individuals making instinctive decisions. This was an operation. The spear thrower, the atlatl. When the spear did come into play, it wasn't what movies show. Nobody was standing next to a mammoth and stabbing it. The atlatl, a throwing board that acts as an extension of the arm, was in use by at least 30,000 years ago. Found at Combe-Saunière in France, the oldest confirmed specimens are carved from mammoth ivory. Carrying the irony with them, the atlatl effectively doubles the length of the throwing arm, increasing projectile velocity to over 150 kilometers per hour. At that speed, a flint-tipped spear can penetrate the thick hide of a mammoth. But the hunters still didn't stand in front of the animal. They targeted the soft tissue, the underside of the trunk, the area behind the front leg reaching the lung, the back of the knee to sever tendons and immobilize the animal. A precise knowledge of anatomy, not just force, was what made the kill. A 2021 study analyzing mammoth bones from the Sonora site in Mexico found impact wounds clustered in exactly those anatomical weak points across multiple individuals. The hunters weren't hacking randomly. They were aiming. In 1997, evolutionary biologist Paul Shepard published a landmark argument called The Others, a study of how human cognition was shaped not just by hunting, but by the specific act of understanding prey animals. His argument was this: the reason human beings developed theory of mind, the ability to simulate another creature's inner experience, wasn't for social bonding. It was for hunting. To successfully hunt an animal that can kill you, you have to know what it's afraid of, what direction it will run when startled, whether it will turn and fight or flee, what it needs, where it sleeps, what sounds it makes when it's calm versus when it's alarmed. In other words, you have to build a mental model of another being's subjective experience. That is, almost exactly, the cognitive skill that underlies human empathy. Shepard argued that human beings developed the ability to understand other minds, not by looking at each other, but by spending tens of thousands of years looking at animals. The hunt wasn't just survival, it was the first school. And what it was teaching, without any of the hunters knowing it, was how to imagine being someone else. That skill didn't stay in the forest. It came back to camp. It shaped how we read each other's intentions, how we cooperated, how we built alliances and resolved conflicts and eventually constructed every social structure we've ever lived inside. The ability to think like a mammoth taught us how to think like a human. Think about the last time you read a room, walked into a meeting and immediately sensed that something was off. Noticed the way someone was standing and knew they were uncomfortable before they said a word. Felt the shift in energy in a conversation and adjusted what you were about to say. That's not a social skill. That is a hunting skill. Running on the same cognitive hardware that a group of humans used 21,000 years ago to track an animal for 6 hours across open ground, reading its breathing, its stride pattern, the way it turned its head, predicting what it would do next. The reason you can read other people is the same reason your ancestors could follow a mammoth for an entire day without losing it. They were doing something that had never existed on Earth before. They were imagining what it felt like to be something else. And once that was possible, once one creature could simulate the experience of another, everything changed, not just hunting. Everything. We tell the story of early humans as a story of weapons, spears, fire, stone tools, but the real weapon wasn't in their hands. It was the ability to hold another creature's mind inside their own, to feel its fear, to predict its movement, to run a simulation of the world from inside a perspective that wasn't theirs. They didn't defeat the giants by being stronger. They defeated them by being the first thing on Earth that could imagine being something else. And you're still doing it. Every day. In every conversation, every decision, every moment you try to understand what someone else is thinking or feeling. That instinct wasn't taught to you. It was hunted into your ancestors over hundreds of thousands of years. One impossible kill at a time. Tomorrow you'll read a room, or sense a mood, or know something is wrong before anyone says a word. Just know, that's not a soft skill. That's the thing that killed the mammoth.